All right, this is really an amazing powwow between the North and the South Korean leaders. They're apparently getting along just great, setting the stage, we are told, for what could be a very productive powwow when the President of the United States is meeting with the leader of North Korea. A little too early to tell, but to retired Navy Captain Chuck Nash, who always helps me sort of step back from a lot of the pomp and ceremony and look at the real deal here. And I think when we last chatted, Captain, you were reminding me that let's not get ahead of ourselves here. They want things, we want things. He's a wily leader. He's got this meeting. He doesn't want to botch that. But we've learned from him in the past that he can do an about-face very, very quickly. We've learned from his father the same, his grandfather the same. So how do we mark his sincerity?
It has to be verify, then trust, to reverse Ronald Reagan's famous saying. I think, Neil, what we're looking at here is a three-step process. And also the last time we spoke, I think we talked about this. Step one is end the Korean War. That appears to be underway. Many observers never thought that would happen in their lifetime. That's happening. Second step is to come up with a mutually agreed upon non-aggression pact between the two countries, backed up by the international community with very vigorous and intrusive inspection regimes. And then the third thing is the eventual political reunification of the Korean Peninsula. All those steps require a lot of due diligence on the part of not just the United States and South Korea, but the international community, because of the amount of nuclear technology that has moved out of North Korea and into places like Iran.
It's clear the North Koreans need money. And I've always wondered what's wacky about that, Captain, is that their biggest benefactor, China, does have a lot of money, but has obviously not shared the loot, backed them up when it came to these sanctions. But they need the United States for the money. How should we play that?
It would be a very interesting dynamic if the Chinese, keeping the North Koreans on the tether, were to somehow lose that tether. You want to talk about changing the political landscape in the Far East. You've got Japan, which is an economic powerhouse, South Korea, an economic powerhouse, China's an economic powerhouse. Who's the poor kid on the block? And which side of, where's his bread buttered in the future? All Kim is about is keeping that regime intact. He is not an irrational actor. He's a very rational actor. But, it's like a family business. The first generation starts it, the second generation builds it, and if they're not careful, the third generation loses it. I don't think Kim wants to be that third generation.
You mentioned family. He's killed a lot of family members. His dad did the same. His grandfather did the same. He's a pretty brutal SOB. So I'm wondering, he's the leader we have, and then we can't control the leaders with whom we chat. But obviously, we go into this eyes wide open, right? But how do we make sure that what is committed to is done?
If there's no intrusive inspection regime, then you can't. Because it's the old saying about...
they can change that on a dime, right? I mean, if you want to get a regime in there and just check something out. We learned that from Saddam Hussein, right? And
yes, sir.
To a lesser extent, Colonel Gaddafi. So how do we police that, knowing full well that at any moment they can stop it?
Well, that's just it. All of these things, you don't just let go of the rope, okay? You've got to meter that out. And every time there has to be a quid pro quo. So it's not just that we're going to, release some of the sanctions and do all this happy stuff. This was the equivalent of, well, it was historic. It really was. And, of course, Trump's going to get no credit for this, just like Reagan. The left tries to keep Reagan from being the one who ended the Cold War. Everybody knows it's true, but nobody's going to give him credit for it. So he has to be careful. President Trump has to be careful that if he's the master of the deal, that he's very judicious in the way he handles this deal. And I think, given his background, he's more than capable of ensuring that this goes step by step, verified each time before the next iteration.
I just wonder when he talks about, I'll walk away if I feel that we're bogged down. Now, over what time period? I mean, when President Kennedy first met with Nikita Khrushchev, I think they met in Vienna, and it was their first time meeting. It went over a couple of days. It didn't go well for JFK. But by that definition, after the first day, he could have said, well, I'm out of here. And he stuck it out, and then he returned later and ultimately dealt with the Cuban Missile Crisis and obviously the two forged a pact that unfortunately ended the day the president was assassinated. But my only point in saying that is that what would be the point the president would stand up and leave in what is to be a meeting that's not expected to go on for weeks, after all? What do you think?
If a deal that he signs, and he's a businessman, he signs a contract, there are things that are expected out of that. And if he sees that he's going to sign a deal, sign a contract where there's no verification, where there's no there, he's going to be Reagan at Reykjavik. He'll just get up and walk out. And that worked out very well for Reagan. And the same thing with Trump. I don't think Kim has entertained the idea of talking to President Trump without realizing the fact that he can't play this guy. Because if he does, this is the first time since Reagan that all options truly were on the table. And he knows that. And with the sanctions and all options being military on the table, I think it shook people up. And back to that analogy with the family business, he doesn't want to be the third generation that follows through and loses it.
Chuck Nash, we'll watch it very, very closely. Thank you very, very much.
My pleasure, Neil. Have a great weekend.
All right, you too.